back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I am here today to do some quick fire reviews. I have a lot of books that I have read over the past month or two, three, quite a few months, and I've not reviewed them for you, so I want to do some quicker reviews to kind of tell you guys my thoughts and see whether you've read them and what you thought of them if you have. So let me know in the comments below if you did read these, what you thought of them. Let's get started. The first book that I have to review is this one, The Summoner by Gail Z. Martin. This one was my first one of her books, and it is a very classic fantasy. It does feel very kind of tropey and kind of nothing new. It follows a character called Matrice or Triss, who is the prince of this land, and he is a summoner. He is a very powerful summoner, not that he knows this at first, but once a tragedy happens, he ends up with loads of power and he is on the run away from his evil brother who has taken over the kingdom, and also he is trying to unlock and uncover the true potential of his own powers. Now, what I like about this is that it was easy to read, easy to get into, but what I didn't like about it was that it was very tropey. It felt very generic. It did not feel super different, and I was hopeful that when I went into this it would be really fun because it was about necromancy and demons and sort of summoning of the dead. All of that sounded really cool. I don't think it was utilised as well as it could have been. I would have liked to see more kind of spooky, ominous, kind of creative ways of using it, and I don't feel like we really got that. So for me, this one was like very middle of the road. I think 2.5 to 3 stars. Interesting, fun concept, but nothing original. So that was that. The next book I have is actually one that I did not finish, and that is this one, The Green Rider by Kristen Britton. I was really hopeful about this because I had heard good things. I know this is quite a long series. I was hoping to really get into it. I like to support women writing fantasy, particularly because that's something that tends to gel better with me, but I just did not get into this. It follows a young woman called Carrigan, and she's like this rebel who has got into trouble at school, so she's running away to kind of try and avoid the embarrassment for her family of her being expelled, I think she is. And when she's on her journey home, she actually gets approached by a person called a Green Rider. They are running along and they are basically on the brink of death, carrying a message for the king, and she takes over from this Green Rider when he dies, and she is now the custodian of this message and she has to take it to the king. Now that sounded really cool, and actually there is a horse character in this who is like this crazy powerful ghost horse called Horse who can just do magical things. I like that character a lot. I didn't love her and I didn't love the general premise. I felt like it was kind of quite a boring start to the story. Even though it sounds like it'll be cool, it just didn't feel exciting to me. And I think I got maybe 20% of the way through, something like that, and I just wasn't enjoying it. I just wasn't feeling the urge to pick it up, to sit down and read, so I called it a day and I just put it down and I did not finish it. So obviously I'm not rating it, but I didn't finish it, so I can't say I was enjoying it by any means, which is a shame. But I'd love to know if you've read this series, whether it gets better or whether you kind of enjoyed it more than I did just from the outset. It wasn't for me. The next one I have to talk about is this one. It is not a fantasy book. It's called Tiny Pretty Things, and this is a contemporary. I actually really enjoyed this. Every now and then I want to read a contemporary book, which is usually a YA contemporary, just to kind of freshen my palette and get some sort of different kind of thinking and different stories, just because then I feel like I can go back into my fantasy loves really easily. And this one was great. It was exactly what I wanted. It was about a ballet school. It follows a few different characters called Bet, June and Gigi, and they are quite different from one another. Now, this is written by 2 authors, and I think they do a really good job of kind of blending their voices and equally giving each of the characters their own voice, narratively speaking. And I really enjoyed it. It's about kind of the rivalry of being in this very, very elite ballet school. It's about these girls and the trouble that they get into to try and be the best, but also to just kind of get through their day-to-day lives. So it was definitely one that raised quite a few interesting issues throughout the story, including like race relations and things like that. And I really liked it. I think I gave it around 4 stars, something like that. So I definitely recommend this. It was just easygoing. It was different. It was something a little bit niche, but I liked it a lot. Speaking of things that I really liked, this book is a non-fiction book, but it does have sort of sci-fi elements, I would say, because it deals with very futuristic technologies. It's called Sex, Robots and Vegan Meat. And this book basically explores 4 different topics: sex, birth, death, and food. And it's about these 4 different topics and kind of the latest inventions in these things that are going to revolutionize the way that we see each of these things in our day-to-day world. Now, it is non-fiction, like I say, but it deals with sex dolls, it deals with robots, it deals with manufacturing meat alternatives. It's just really, really interesting. There were, I think, like mechanical wombs, and yeah, it was just all really interesting stuff about death, about life, about birth, about kind of everything. And I think the author does a really, really good job of making this very approachable with some very cool, crazy technologies on the brink of being introduced to the world. She goes and she interviews kind of the people involved in these different technologies around the world, and I would highly, highly recommend this. If you haven't read it, I would certainly say it's worth looking into, especially if you're looking for something for like non-fiction November, which I know is coming up. I would highly recommend this. It really does deal with some very interesting topics in some really approachable, easy ways, but also just feels fun and quirky and different. And I mean, if the cover alone is not enough to draw your attention with like the crazy, striking, mad, luminous colours and the funny name, then I think the writing inside certainly will. And I actually think I gave this 5 stars because it just really was interesting. It dealt with a lot of stuff that I hadn't heard of before, and in some really interesting ways. There was also a few things that I had heard of before, but she still kind of dealt with them in really interesting ways. So I highly, highly recommend this. And it's not one that I expected to like as much as I did. I also didn't realise it was non-fiction when I started reading it. I thought it was a sci-fi, but I really, really recommend it. And I think a lot of you would enjoy it. If you are into sort of sci-fi generally, then this is like real sci-fi. So yeah, pretty cool. The next one I have is Sunfall. This one I read for my book club, and I definitely enjoyed it, but I think a lot of the people in the club felt the same way about this one. It was a little bit slow going to get into and probably was not as developed as it could have been. Now, the idea is about the sun falling. It's also quite a political book. It deals a lot with different governments and kind of how they are suppressing the truth about the sun, which is going to ruin the world. And then we deal with a couple of people who are trying to hack into the government systems to find out what's really going on. We deal with people who are actually working for the government to try and combat the problems. We deal with like environmental people who know what's going on. It's multi-POV and it's an interesting look at what might have happened if this was really a problem. But I will say it does feel a little bit detached. I don't feel like any of the characters really gripped me as much as I would have wanted. And so I think I gave this around 3 stars. It was a very interesting read with an interesting concept, but it did not grip me emotionally speaking. So I would have liked to have a little bit more of an emotional attachment if I was going to really enjoy this. But I do think it's an enjoyable read once you kind of get into the science and get into kind of the concept and what the author is trying to do. So yeah, I liked it definitely, but I wouldn't say it was my favourite. However, it was an easy sci-fi to get into, so if you're looking for something that's not super tech heavy or super difficult to understand on the language, then this is probably that. And it's also an environmental sci-fi, which I think are certainly becoming a bit more popular nowadays, so that might be something to bear in mind if you're looking for one of those to pick up soon. Another book which I read for a book club is this one. I read The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. She's the author of The 10,000 Doors of January, which I very much enjoyed when I read it, so I was hopeful that I would enjoy this too, and I certainly did. It's a kind of feminist look at redoing the Salem witches, and we follow 3 different witches who are sisters. It's kind of a play on like Macbeth and the Witches, and also the Salem witch trials, and lots of other kind of folklore witchy stuff woven in. I do think that the author does a great job of kind of reimagining things like fairy tales and kind of redoing them in her version, her vision, which I really like to see. And I think that the relationships that these three sisters have are certainly well developed. I do think they could have been slightly more individual in terms of tone of voice, because for me they didn't really fully feel like their own characters. They felt a little bit overlappy at times, and I wasn't always 100% certain who was who and what was what, because I maybe lost track of who we were talking about and then they sounded too similar to the other. However, with that being said, I do think this is a lot of fun. It does deal with the witch trials and kind of like feminist women banding together to show that they are not afraid to take back the power that has been suppressed from them for many, many years. And I do think that that is all really cool. I think the concepts that the author is dealing with were great, and I just think that it was a lot of fun. I think everyone in the group actually for my book club enjoyed this, and we all said that it was a really different concept and something we hadn't really come across recently, so I would recommend it just for that. But yeah, I did enjoy this. I think I gave this around 4 or 3.5 to 4 stars, so I certainly would say this is worth picking up, and especially if you're looking for like a witchy read coming up upon like Halloween, this would be a great one. The next one I have to talk about is called Sairō's Claw. This one was kindly sent by the author to me, and I absolutely loved this. It was so fun. It's a fantasy story, so it deals with fantasy elements such as a wolf who can kind of be like this spirit animal, possessed animal who can communicate with one of our main characters. I really like the wolf character, and I really think that magical creatures are just something I enjoy seeing, and when they're done well as part of the story, that is also really, really fun. So I highly recommend checking this book out. It's also beautiful and the first one in the series, so I'm very excited to get my hands on the next one in the series. It follows a character who is called Torako, and this character is one who is just dedicated to taking care of her family and the people that she loves, and she does that by kind of defending the area that they live in. And then one day she goes back home and she sees that her wife have actually been taken away, so this does have LGBT themes throughout it, and they have been stolen away by bandits, and these bandits also have a POV, so we're actually seeing the POV of Torako, but also the POV of the bandits and kind of what they're doing and who they're working for. So it's these two different opposing sides, and we're trying to kind of find out what is going on with this wolf spirit which comes into it, but also why these people are being stolen away from their home without any kind of actual discussion happening, and what they're going to be used for. There is political strife on the horizon, isn't there always? And it just was a fun read. I would say that this was one of the really good self-published books that I've read recently. So if you're looking for a self-published read that you know is great, then I would highly recommend this. I think the author is lovely as well on Twitter and places that I've spoken to her. She's always a lovely, lovely person. But the book itself was great, and I'm so pleased when I like a person in real life, but also I read their book and it's great, and then I can rave about it. So I highly recommend this. I think I gave it a 4.5 stars, something like that. Again, really recommend this one. If you've not already heard of it, then do check it out. And the final one that I have to talk about in this video is The Museum of You, which is by Carrie Spray, another one that I read for book club, different book club. This was my work book club. It follows a young girl called Clover, and then it also follows her dad, and Clover and her dad are in a weird situation where they don't have Clover's mum around. She died when Clover was born, like just after. So it's always been her and her dad, but Clover has this kind of fantasy of her mum and what she was like. And this story is all about the objects that were left in her mum's room and kind of what each object means to Clover, and how she is trying to curate a museum of her mother through the objects that are left behind. Now, this is done unbeknownst to her father, and therefore a lot of the objects that she finds, she doesn't actually necessarily know their real purpose or their real origin, so she makes it up. And then we see from her father's point of view the real origin, the real story behind them. We also see the relationship between her and her father. Her father is struggling being a dad, or at least an only dad, an only parent, without the mother influence in his life. And it's really interesting to see the relationship that he has with her, the doubts, the thoughts. So I like that a lot, but I will say that this is a kind of contemporary read. I struggle with some contemporaries if they're a little bit slow going, and I think this one is a bit slow going. Although I like Clover and I like her dad too, I do think this one didn't capture my attention as much as I might have wanted. So I think I gave this 2.5, 3 stars in the end. So I didn't love it, but I think it has some really interesting relationship moments for a single father kind of raising a daughter. So I like that element a lot, and I would say for that it was definitely worth reading. As an overall story, it was alright, it was decent, but it didn't really capture me as much as I might have wanted. So those are the quickfire reviews for all of those books. I might have a few more quickfire reviews for books that I've audiobooked or books that I've read on my Kindle coming up. So hopefully you like this format. It's a quick way of getting through some of the books that I recently just picked up and read and haven't had a chance to tell you guys about yet. So let me know what you think of this format below. Baby is waking up, so I'm going to have to go, and thank you all so much for watching. I will see you very soon in another video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.